So the moderator for tonight's program is Lisa Dubois. Lisa is an ethnographic photojournalist and curator based in New York. Her photographic work focuses on subcultures that are part of society as a whole. Her photographic documentation of Black subcultures in New Orleans demonstrates her deep appreciation for history and tradition. Her exhibitions include the Schomburg Cultural Center for Research in Black Culture, the Gordon Parks Museum in Fort Kansas, and the African American Museum in New Orleans. And you could also view many of her exhibits on the Social Documentary Network website. Just use the search tools to look for her work. So this gives me great pleasure to turn this over to Lisa Dubois. Lisa?
Yes, hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Social Documentary Network recognizes and celebrates Juneteenth in this special 1-hour documentary program. We will feature two exceptional photographers, Chester Higgins and Lou Jones, who have both photographed extensively in Africa, each through a different lens. Each photographer will share their extraordinary photographs and stories and discuss their experiences photographing in Africa. We will gain insight into why each of these photographers have felt compelled to go beyond typical photography and delve deeper into their subjects. I hope you enjoy this presentation, and with that, I'm going to introduce Chester Higgins. Chester Higgins will discuss the making of his book, Sacred Nile, a story of our collective spiritual imagination and practice. Higgins celebrates the agency of people of African descent and their influence on the foundation of Western religion. His images illustrate how faith migrated up and down the River Nile from Ethiopia to Egypt, leaving vestiges of ancient practice in today's worship. This visual portrayal of faith re-examines our spiritual beginnings. With that, I'd like to introduce Chester.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I'm very honored to be here and to share with you and Lou why I'm obsessed with Africa. Growing up in America, you as a Black person, you're constantly reminded that you don't belong here as a minority and in an environment that's very unsafe. And so my interest in Africa started early at Tuskegee, trying to say, well, then where do I belong? And that's what caused me to travel to West Africa in the 71, 72, living in Ghana, and then finding out in Ghana that there was a national organization of African leaders called the Organization of African Unity that was started by Kwame Nkrumah and Haile Selassie. And that year, it moves around every year. And the year 1973, it was going to be in Ethiopia. So I pulled my penance together and I showed up in Addis Ababa. And I was really taken by the culture, by the people. And this was in May of 73, spending a week with the press corps and photographing, being amazed at what I was seeing, but really being captured by the presence and the being in the presence and photographing Haile Selassie. A few months later, I found myself in Egypt, photographing the temples and pyramids and tombs, and I was there again taken. Here I'm at both ends of the Nile, and I'm taken by yes, the architecture. I'm awed by the architecture, by the pyramid and by the columns, but I'm also awed and finding it thousands of questions that roll up in my soul and my head that I can't resolve. And those issues have to do with the history and the culture of these people who left behind engravings in stone, in walls of temples, walls of tombs that were their forms of photographs, essentially telling us who they were and the life they led. And so it taught me a couple of things that year about being in the Nile. First, it taught me that it reinforced or confirmed for me that slavery is not our history. Slavery is an interruption of our history. And secondly, that our relationship with spirituality and divinity goes way back before Genesis. And that what Genesis says and talks about in the Egyptians trying to demonize them is really a propagandistic approach. But you won't know that unless you go and actually experience the place for yourself. So I found, and this particular experience, and I had 6 weeks, on 1 week in Ethiopia, but I had 6 weeks in Egypt due to the October 73 war when there were no planes were flying out. I found that I had a lot to learn. And I came back and I started reading everything that I could about ancient Egypt, reading popular fiction and then nonfiction, and then gradually getting into more nonfiction, into the researchers and the Egyptologists and archaeologists. And I realized that here, these two cultures have taught me something. Not only have we left behind a different experience about religion than we have in the South from the King James Version, but I see here the actual footprints of religious or spiritual thought, and I was able to trace that back through looking at the monuments and the artifacts. That the beginning of spirituality, the beginning of any kind of dialogue between humans and a creative force was begun by the ancient Egyptians and Ethiopians, was begun by the African people. And we can say this not because we want to and our ego feels good about it, but we can say it because the evidence is there. The stone evidence that we have, say, in the tomb of King Unas, 2500 BCE, where it shows in the writings that we couldn't read to 200 years ago, and then only 100 years ago I can really begin to decipher them well enough that we can see the beginning of the writings of what we now call our moral compass, the Ten Commandments, but the concepts of creation, the concepts of ascension to heaven for the dead, all of these, the concepts of purification and worship, all of these things are Egyptian, African terms. You cannot, and once you step back from it, then I realize that all of the other religions that we have today has borrowed heavily from the African experience with spirituality. They try to change and try to disassociate themselves from the patrimony of the work. But as you study it more, you realize that it is that there's a sharing going on, but you also realize that all religions and all spirituality, in some sense, are the same. And that's what Sacred Dawn is about, to show you that we have this history, that the patriarch religions that we worship today stand on the shoulder of the African conceptual religion in divine nature. Even the people will try to say, the Greeks tried to muddy the water and say that the Africans and the Egyptians had many gods, which is not true, but they did have one god, and you may recognize that name. And that one god of the Egyptians So, growing up in America as a Black person, we are always reminded that we are not, in many different ways, that we are not wanted, that we are not a part of the majority, and that there is essentially a minority tax that we pay each and every day. And so I was struck by my desire to find out, well, then where do we belong? And that started my whole trips to going to Africa. Is there a place that where I can stand out and my color does not become a target, and that I can blend in and find a sense of normalcy? And part of the statement by Malcolm X sort of brought that all together. I'm looking at the reason I go to Africa, I'm obsessed with Africa, is I'm obsessed with issues of identity. Where do I belong and who are my people? I'm obsessed with the memory that the lack of memory that we have in this country about who we are. And I tell people, because of my trips to over and over, that my work is about saying to other African Americans that our history, slavery is not our history. Slavery is an evil interruption of our history. And to back that up, I show the evidence of what our history looks like. So here you see an image of where I had to learn astrophotography, and I had to learn mountain climbing to get this picture at 8,600 feet above sea level in Ethiopia. And what led me there was that as I began to study more about the Egyptian faith, and I saw that the Egyptians felt they were astronomers fundamentally, and they felt that they've got all of the information from the sky, and that the Milky Way was a reflection for them of the River Nile. Here, sunrise at the pyramids in Giza, the pyramid of King Khufu. Here we have the front of a huge temple, the temple of Medinet Habu of Ramses III, set back against the Theban mountains. And here we have the temple of Ramses in Abu Simbel that comes alive when the sun rises over Lake Nasser early in the morning. And 2 times in a year, this temple is dug out from the mountain, and it goes back about 300 feet. And the light of the sun light up these statues twice a year in the back. Here is the interior of that mountain. All of it chiseled out from the mountain. No building materials were brought here. And it's an amazing engineering feat. Here's a different kind of temple where you brought construction material to the site. The Temple of Abydos, which is one of the oldest cities in Egypt. And then my coming upon the mummies in the Cairo Museum, and that started in 73. And here's the mummy of Ramses the Great, and trying to being astounded when you confront a mummy that it looks like the person that it is, and it's staggering to think how many thousands of years distance between you and it. And here is the largest tomb in the Valley of the King, the tomb of Seti I, and you see on the ceiling the formulas, the priest formulas of night and day. And here you see the symbol of the woman Nut, who during the daytime the sun is this way, and then at night it travels through the stars. And Nut is a constant conceptual paradigm that they use to talk about divinity, talk about continuity, and to talk about the concept that is out of darkness that light is born. So that takes, in the simplest form, if any of us who have been born, we were not born in the light. We were born in the darkness of the womb. And just like everything else, the light is what we found when we got here. Then I start doing a lot of royal tombs. And this is the royal tomb of Ramses' 14th son, Merenptah. And then here is the gold eternal coffin of King Tut, lying in his coffin that was only discovered 100 years ago. Here's a bust of King Tut that was a part of his tomb. And then here is inside of here's the walls from a tomb underneath the pyramid of Unas. And what's spectacular about this is that there's only 3 underground tombs that have writings on it. And in these writings, what's specific about this is these writings talk about creation, talk about ascension to heaven, talks about a moral compass, and it talks about the fundamentals of life. Later on, this is the first time when we see appearance of anything that suggests what later came to be the 10 Commandments. Now, in Ethiopia, you have a very healthy sense that people have a very healthy sense of themselves, where God looks like them. Here you have Mary with Jesus looking like them. And then you have, I came to realize that this biblical impossible conception scene came out 7,000 years before of the Egyptian spiritual imagination, where you have the mother who had the son by impossible conception. It wasn't with a father. It was God coming down and delivering it to her and through the spirit. And then you have Queen Nefertari and her angel, or her Ba. Angels were always a part of the deceased in their tombs, and the angels look like them. And the angel had wings because when you are buried, the only thing that has freedom is the spirit of the soul that can go back and forth. Now, it's interesting. I learned something not until recently, after studying these royal tombs for decades. I came to realize that in royal tombs, there is nothing that speaks of their family. In a king's tomb, you will not have his wife, you will not have his children. In the queen's tomb, you will not have her husband, you will not have her children. And all of the writings are formulaic instructions that the priests are leaving behind, and it's a conversation with eternity. Whereas in private tombs, you do have, and here's a scene again of the soul leaving the dead body. You do have conversations about memory. So you'll see things about that family. Here you have the image in Ethiopia that comes out of that angel scene that you see back up here. That angel scene has been rendered in a way that we now identify with the Roman Catholic Church, the angel with wings. And here are churches that were built with the same sort of architectural construction as the great temple of Ramses at Abu Simbel, where no construction material was brought to the site. In fact, in the 13th century, a couple hundred years before you had Columbus getting lost over the Atlantic, the Ethiopians built what they call their New Jerusalem. And what they did is they went to a mountain range. It's called the Lasta Mountain Range. And they etched out at the top of the mountain the footprint of a church. And then they start digging out the mountain around that footprint. They went down 40 feet. And then along the way, they did the columns, they did the windows, they did the inside of the church, and they cleared 40 feet around from this edifice. And these structures are still, today, pilgrims travel to see and worship. This is the outside. This is the inside of that same church. All chiseled from the rock. Here's another one of those churches. This is the smallest one. You just showed you the largest one. And Ethiopia I was very fascinated with the fact that it was my first time being in a place where the average elevation is 5,000 feet, 5,000 to 12,000 feet. And the stars are right above you. It's so much so, that's the main event of the evening, that it looks like you can really reach up and touch the stars, touch the floor of heaven. And these pictures, like you see this one, I had to bring all my lighting material with me. And I think with this image, I probably use 4 different lights at nightfall to catch the cavity that they had dug out, the structure that's actually living sculpture against the background of the night. And here's that same church years later as a horizontal against the night sky with a lot more lights. I think I had to use 6 on this one, plus 1 up here for the ceiling. And here you have people of the Orthodox faith doing their procession. And here's another processional. And another processional. And here in Egypt, you have African Americans who go to Egypt because they feel that the ancient Egyptian religion is their spiritual legacy. And they go and they try to perform rituals, sometimes in the temples themselves, but they get blocked a lot. But here they also have access in Aswan to the reservoir, and they can and they do their early morning rituals. So this shows what some of this book is about, some of the images from this book, Sacred Nile. It's a way of trying to actually capture and render the sacred legacy of people of African descent, and that it was our people who came up with in history, since history is the line between folklore and writing, that our people were the first people to write about a relationship with the divine, the creation. And they left all these footprints along the Nile, I say footprints of God, that speaks to that. Now, I didn't know this before going in 73, and I doubt if any other people who are talking to now know this, but I think that's been the role of my work as a photographer, to discover for myself, and then just share that discovery with whoever want to be a part of my audience, that show that these things exist, and to show how they exist in context, and hope that people will go for themselves and have a look. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that we could have one or two questions for Chester before beginning with Lou, and then at the end, we'll open it up for questions for both of them. So, is there a particular, Glenn, do you want to take that?
Oh, I was unmuted.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I was going to say, if anybody has a question for Chester, just go ahead and unmute yourself right now and ask the question. But we don't need to. Yeah.
Chester, mine is not so much a question as it is a statement of just kind of getting to know you over the years. But my first introduction to my memory of Africa was going to the Brooklyn Museum. And I was taking a class at a community college in history. And I decided to go and look at the whatever statues there were of Egypt. And then I created not only a paper, but I also created a photographic book, if you will, very, very, minimal type of book. But that was my really first introduction. And I've been to Africa 6 times and hoping for a 7th in April. But I love what you say about finding your identity and feeling in sync with the people, because it's very true. I feel very different in America, and know that every few years or whatever, I need to make that visit home to the motherland, because I feel so different. I mean, there's no question as to who I am when I'm there. But thank you so much. Beautiful, wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, we feel safer.
Yeah.
We feel safer in Africa than we do here.
Yeah, it's true. Mm-hmm.
But people may have questions about the actual photographs, the technical stuff, as well as my conceptual stuff. But I'd love to hear what you have, what the work evokes in you.
Yeah, so why don't we wait until the end when we have the fuller Q&A, and we'll have time for a lot more questions. And why don't we move on now to Lou?
Okay, so we'll have some time at the end to answer for them to answer any other questions. So right now, what I'd like to do is introduce Lou Jones, who is the founder of the panAFRICAproject. He will discuss his ongoing dedication to photographing and documenting the diverse individuals living and working across the African continent today, and will present some of his exceptional photographs from 2 editions of his panAFRICAproject book that create a contemporary visual portrait of modern Africa. So with that, I would like for Lou to make his presentation for us.
Well, Thank you. I'm Lou Jones. I see a number of wonderful people that I have known for a long time, but I want to really highlight the fact that it is and I said this to him before before this whole thing started. I said that being on the same dais as Chester Higgins, I've known him for a long time, but it's an honor to be able to speak on this with the same breath as Chester, and about a subject that I hold so dear, which is Africa. But I'm gonna start sharing. I'm gonna try to share and get you right into pictures. Let's see. Can everybody see this? Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. I began a few years ago. I began what was absolutely an insane idea of going to Africa. The idea being the simplest part of it being to photograph all 54 countries in Africa. As I said, it was an insane idea, and so we have been going for the past few years. And so my project's a little different, comes from a completely different angle than Chester, in that I'm trying to highlight the contemporary component of what's going on. Many years ago, before the actual project started, I had the opportunity to read an article that said that the African Union was going to censor, and a lot of people who are on now, and other people have heard me say this before, but the African Union was going to censor Western media access to the stories, the life, the culture that was going on in Africa. They were going to censor it because they did such an horrible job. Our 11 o'clock news, our newspaper, our front page news stories only dealt with basically three topics, and that was pestilence, poverty, and conflict. And I had been to Africa and saw nothing of that. So I was quite taken by the fact that growing up in America, and censorship was a four-letter word in our schools, in our educational system, and I realized that that was a horrible thing that they were censoring. And then after some more thought, I realized that they were probably right, and that perhaps I should be involved with some kind of small little way of trying to change that narrative. Somebody said on Facebook that they were going to, if they had a dollar for every time somebody used the word narrative incorrectly, they were going to be rich. But it's still a narrative that we see with our media. And I realized that I had more ideas. I talked to dozens of photographers who I enlisted to try to help me change this opinion of this negative. And it's an intentional narrative that Western media puts such a bad light on Africa. Having been thrown out, having been sent away, having gained independence in the last few years, Western media still tries to make sure that they have a hold and controls Africa by using these very, very negative things. So I wanted to change. I wanted to show what contemporary modern Africa looked like. So this began in Senegal. This began many years ago. This photograph I took in Senegal, but it was actually before this was the first. I landed in Ghana, and this is what Ghana presented. This energy, this vastness, just in one little part. And this little town actually is where a lot of the slaves came from, but we're not going to deal with the slavery. We're going to deal with contemporary Africa. But this vibrancy was what I was trying to illustrate in my photographs and hopefully continue to. The project, as complex as this photograph is, gets more and more complicated as we move. This is in Ghana. This is in an area, a region called Kumasi. Some people may even know Kumasi. It's where the Ashanti, the sort of the center of where the Ashanti, one of the more well-known indigenous populations. And I realized before I started, but really realized once I got to Ghana and tried to see if this idea I had was even possible to do. I realized that all the places in Africa would be layers, a layer upon layer, complication upon complication. The old with the traditional, the old with the modern, the rich with poor, the different languages, the different, etc. And this is a photograph of layers. This is modern Africa inside the car, and people doing the traditional modern ways of living and incorporating at the same time the textiles of tradition, but the modernity of today and how people go about. And these are Ashanti women. Layers. The project seemed to be possible. So I started to do this. Every few months, I go to another country. I spend a long, extended, this is in Tanzania. This is a lot of people probably who are online right now may have been to Tanzania, but we try to, and this is a Maasai warrior. And many of people probably have been even to some of the tourist villages where they dance and they speak to you and they show their crafts and et cetera, et cetera. But this was a way out in the remote part of Tanzania. And this was a camel. Well, actually, it was livestock auction. So thousands of cows and camels and all kinds of things. And I chased down, and in some countries in Africa, it is very difficult to photograph people. In some countries, it is not so hard. And I have to interpret. So this was an environment. This was all Maasai, and I stood out like a sore thumb being from a long way away, and they were none too happy with having me there. So I had to devise techniques in talking to the principals, the major domos, the people who were in charge in order to get permission. But once given that kind of permission, I was able to photograph a great deal and to show. And this is modern. This is modern Africa. I will show you some much more obvious elements of modernity, but this is now. Some of you may know the Maasai. Some of you may know about these indigenous populations that we are taught in 8th grade, 7th grade. We're taught about these things, and we see them, and our media sees them as saying primitive, poor, uneducated, and whereas a lot of these indigenous populations are maintaining, literally in direct parallel competition with contemporary, the guy with the briefcase and the tie going to work in the 37th story of his building downtown. They are maintaining their traditions with a great deal of resistance from from sometimes their governments. In this particular case, these people are all going to a market, a monthly market. It's not only a place where they can buy a lot of the things they need, but also it's a socialization. But they are being pushed off by tourism, off of their native lands, much like the Native Americans here in the United States. They're being pushed off by the government because they're making so much money from tourists coming, looking at the animals and things like that, that they are being very, so there's a political component. Politics is one of the most important parts of our project, as to how people, but we also go and we try to put different spins on the natural resources. You know, Africa has an enormous cadre of natural resources. We know from our schools about the diamonds and the coal, and we may know a little bit about the oil, but also they have very, very modern things but I also do natural resources. This is Mount Kilimanjaro from a fair distance. I actually stood on Mount Kilimanjaro a few hours before I took this photograph, but it was socked in. I just got back from Japan. I see Lloyd Green. He knows, he helped me on that trip. I was in Japan teaching a workshop, and we were trying to photograph Mount Fuji, but this is a mountain in direct competition with, it's the tallest mountain in all of Africa. This is also, Africa is not just the continent. It also has many islands that surround on both the Atlantic, Pacific, and not Pacific, I'm sorry, the Indian Ocean, etc. This is in the Indian Ocean. This is an island off the coast of Tanzania called Zanzibar, and very unique. And this happens, the smaller and smaller I can hone in on these different, very individual environments, not just the countries, but the towns, the villages, the homes. So Zanzibar is very Islamic, it's very conservative. It's very, very, just a few years ago, you weren't even allowed to wear, women weren't even allowed to go to the beach in bikinis. And so they have a very conservative structure, but Zanzibar gives it part of its name to what used to be Tanganyika, is now Tanzania, and it gets the Z from Zanzibar. But Glenn used this photograph. This goes on the other side of the continent, completely to the other side of the continent, where this is Namibia. And this is on the Atlantic Ocean. And as I said, so we're photographing industry, we're photographing healthcare, we're photographing education, we're photographing music, sports. And this was as we are sadly use in our newspapers, we talk about the death of the newspaper in America. And in fact, the newspaper is alive and well in most of Africa. It's still a very inexpensive vehicle for people to get their news, and especially their local news. And also, one of the things I did not realize until I talked to these people that allowed us to get into this printing press that we're printing the Namibian in Namibia, is that they advertise. They can advertise their trades. They can advertise their companies. They can advertise. And so this fellow was what we would call proofreading. And I thought he was reading. But in point of fact, for us photographers, we all know he was actually looking at the registration of the color photograph. Since it's a 4-color process, he was making sure that as the newspapers were coming out that the photographs were still were still in registration and things like that. So, and that's something I knew from my long history in the film days. This is Namibia. This is but the other side of the country. And we get these, as we talked about layers, but we get these contrasts. And every tourist publication, every tourist pamphlet, every tourist book that you buy about a different individual country in Africa always talks within the first paragraph. It always talks about this is a land of contrast. It's a cliche, but it's true. And that's why everybody uses it. So this is on the other side. This is the Kalahari Desert. This is way over right up against the Kalahari Desert, and we see how people are living in the nature of being in environments that are so harsh that their entire existence revolves around doing things that this fellow is gathering firewood, and that's used for heating water, for bathing, for cooking, for heating, for all kinds of things. But the interaction with people literally existing on the edge of the desert was really very, very profound to me. This is Namibia. This is Namibia Airlines, and it took me the entire time I was to convince the airline to let me into and photograph the airport. And this was inside one of the. I keep saying it's a 737, but it's not. Somebody corrected me, and some pilot was able to tell me exactly what I thought it was a 737. And I show this not only because of the a level of sophistication of them. Some of the most interesting airlines in the world are now South Africa Airlines. Ethiopia has the largest airline as Chester has said, he's been up there as the largest airline in the continent. But I bring a lot of lighting gear. We are packing up to go to Uganda at the end of this week. So we'll be going back to our 18th country, but this is lit. So I bring soft boxes and umbrellas and stands and speed lights and all of that stuff. So this is inside the cockpit, and that was really, really wonderful that they allowed me to do that. But surrounded, we have these unique places. This is Lesotho. Everybody see this? This is the continent. Everybody see this? May be backwards, I guess. This is Lesotho is way down and is completely surrounded by South Africa. It's a landlocked country, and it's way up. It is the highest country in the world, and that's complicated how people make these sort of superlatives, but it has the highest low point. So it's all in mountains. It rains constantly, and it creates these, they don't call them tribes in Lesotho. They call them clans. And these herd boys belong to different clans, and they're entrusted with the cattle. And cattle is a mark of sophistication and wealth in Lesotho. And he is wearing a cloak all of these herd boys wear these cloaks, and you can distinguish what clan they belong to by that. But the weird thing is that they stopped making the textiles they use. They stopped making the textiles and using these incredible patterns. And so all of the textiles that they wear come in from China now, which is just another one of these anomalies that we're trying to interpret. This is paying homage to Mr. Higgins, and this is Ethiopia. where he's been doing a lot of his work. This is way up in the northern part, and this is this was intended to show one of the largest markets, outdoor markets in Africa. Goes for blocks and blocks and blocks, and this is the spice. This is very famous for its spices, very, very well known for its spices, and this is a spice. And they're winnowing the spice. They're getting the seeds away from the chaff and the whole thing like that. And it really shows how modern Africa is using a lot of the techniques that they're bringing from their traditions into the new world, and using that rather than buying, as we said, that they were buying their cloaks from China because it's cheaper, but they're maintaining a lot of their bringing their foods into these open air markets and selling right on the street. You can get a washing machine, you can get clothes, you can get stockings, shoes, you can get any kind of food stuff that you can imagine right here in this market. This is a little country right in West Africa called Burkina Faso. The algorithm for how we choose the next country is very, very, very complicated. Those that know a little bit about the project know that we try to do not necessarily a big country in size, but a big country well known, and then we try to make sure that the smaller countries that most people here in America have never heard of are also highlighted with the same energy that we give to the bigger countries, so that the continent is really, really given equal. That's an artifice. That's an artifice that I applied from the very beginning, but it's an effort to make sure that we don't just go to the Moroccos and the South Africas and places like that everybody goes to continuously. We want Burkina. And this is a contemporary dance. We do a lot of arts. We do painters, photographers, musicians, artists, dancers, etc. And this woman was invited by the Atlanta Olympics to bring her contemporary dance group and perform in the United States during the Atlanta Olympics. So, but this is in her studio, and I dare any of you photographers to tell me where the light came from, because we lit this entire, and it's a mirror, so you can't see me and you can't see the lights. Anyway, this is Burkina Faso, and this is where the real joy of the newfound things that you've never seen. You know, I go, and a big part of the problem of photographing such a big problem is being able to identify what you're even seeing. You don't even know what you're seeing sometimes. And we use local pundits, local experts to tell us. We don't use the history books. We do a lot of research before we go, but we literally sit down and talk to the local people to tell us exactly what is important, what is unique about your country. What do you think we should be photographing? Where do we need to go in order to tell the story about? But this is just one of those oddities. I saw it late, about midnight. We were driving by, and it was totally dark and everything. And we drive by, and I see all of these mannequins lined up against the wall, and I just thought it was out of a science fiction film. And so I went back the next day and found these brothers, and they manufacture and fabricate these dress dummies for a retail situation. But it just made such an odd photograph. Burkina Faso again. We went to Bobo Dioulasso, which is the sort of cultural capital of the country, and found this amazing example of some of you may have seen the famous ones in Mali, maybe in Timbuktu, but this Sahel architecture is literally part of the Sahel is the edge of the Sahara, and people try to, again, this is a desert, and so wood and building blocks and stone and everything are rare. So they, over the history, have started to use these. This is a mosque. They have started to use these sand and mud and things like that to form this very unique kind of architecture. And the wood, the rare wood that they get, they use as the structural devices that make that use our support, and they actually stick out from the mud, and they use them as ladders. So every season they completely remud the town comes together and completely remuds the structure, and they use these the support beams that stick out as sort of the ladder, the lattice system. This is Morocco.
Lou, excuse me for interrupting, but so that we have time for audience questions, could you bring this to a close soon?
Yeah, okay. And this is, like I said, medicine, Morocco. Many of you have been here. This is Gabon on the Atlantic. This is right on the, what do you call it? The rainforest. It's one of the countries, the second lung of the world is this rainforest, and they're bringing one of their biggest resources. But oil refineries, and oil has surpassed in Gabon. This is Kenya. This is last year in Kenya. Like I said, we do the artist, we photograph the artist, and this is in the largest ghetto. So all of the resources you see here are stolen. The electricity, the water, everything. They're living in the largest Kibera, and it's a really wonderful, not wonderful in terms of the economics, but a wonderful place to photograph in. And someday Africa will feed the world. This is their, as I said, newspapers, etc. are there. And this is in the last country, Mozambique. This is the last picture. And it is a child's pediatric cancer ward. And we talking our way into this was quite an, and you get a sort of a stretch of everything that we've done in these few photographs. And I'm open for questions. Oh, sorry. This is Mozambique. Sorry.
All right. Thank you, Lou, for these amazing photographs, especially towards the end. They just kept getting better and better. Sorry, I had to cut you off there.
Thank you.
Lisa, would you like to start the questions with the first question?
Sure. So I noticed that Lou mentioned several times how he had to talk his way into this or that. And us photographers, we always want to hear those kind of stories. So yeah, I would love, I'm sure everyone here would love to hear one or two of your techniques that allowed you to make that, you know, enabled you to open those gates so that you can get in there and get those really good photographs. So yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
I would be delighted. You have to realize that Chester sort of exposed himself a little bit by telling us that, you know, he lit a lot of those places, those historical places, and I'm just amazed at that. But we do a lot of that, but some of the people that are online know that I've been making a living as a commercial photographer all over the world for the last, I won't tell you how many years. I've been doing it longer than most of you have been alive, as I always cliche say. But we do a lot, and the effort of how we talk to these organizations, these factories, these CEOs, these directors of hospitals to let us photograph operations is a skill that we have developed over the years. And one person in Morocco who took me around quite a bit and was really, and he said, he told the head of the hospital, he said, Lou has a light touch. And I think that when I walk into a village, when I walk into, and Chester, I'm sure knows this, it has a lot to do just with attitude. You know, people can detect how much, whether you mean harm, whether you're going to be trouble. And a lot of times they ask for what is in it for me? So we get a lot of that, and we have to sort of negotiate that issue a lot, but it's all negotiation. It's just all negotiation.
Have you supplied any of these places with photographs so that they see the result of your work?
I actually say to them when they give us a little pushback, I actually say that our currency is not money, is photographs. So you remember the photograph that Glenn used, which was the one of the, I learned this early on. I knew this all along, but I really learned it early on with the photograph of the printing press with the newspaper. And I literally saw that photograph, and the managing editor had been so resistant to us photographing in his place. So that night, probably 2 o'clock in the morning, as I was editing, I sent him maybe 6 pictures because I realized we really had something really very, and they asked to use those pictures immediately in their 20th anniversary of their anniversary publication. So now we use that as a device. We're going to Uganda this coming week. And one of the things we have negotiated, one of the supporters, is the fact that we're doing some of the photographs for them. So that's our currency.
So,
Why don't we bring the audience into this discussion now? We have one question, but I'd like to encourage the audience to put your questions in the chat or to raise your hand and we'll call on you. But we do have a question for Chester from Kathleen Dreyer. And her question is, I'm curious how you gained access. My chat just jumped because somebody put another question in there, sorry. I'm curious how you gained access to photograph the site temples in the way that you did over the years.
Gradually, over time. In Egypt, you have to make relationships with Egyptologists who are working on sites. You have to make relationships with the antiquity authorities. And you have to have a crew that's reliable, dependable, that's acceptable to all the placeholders to be able to maneuver. Usually in Ethiopia, it's the same thing. Because I'm interested in these sort of things, it means that I have to get permission first from the government, a letter of that says I'm not a news person and I'm doing this particular project. And this letter then has to be, it's in their local language, and it has to be Xerox because any policeman can come up and stop you, asking you for your credentials. Dealing with the churches, I had to get also permission from from what we would call the archdiocese, from the Pope of the Ethiopian Church. And then I had to get permission in Egypt and Ethiopia from the military because I'm doing flashes at night or early morning dusk. And the military, we don't know where they are, but they say that they have bases nearby and they want to make sure that these are not bombs that are going off that they have to address. So all of these things have to be done before you do the work. You can't, because if you show up and you haven't gone through those steps, any policeman has a right to step in front of you and stop you and even arrest you.
We've spent a lot of time in jails in Africa.
Glad you got out. We have another question from the audience from Becky Field. For Chester and Lou, both of you have photographs with amazing lighting. You've mentioned some about the equipment, but can you each describe more about your lighting techniques and decisions? I know that Lou is an expert in speed lighting. He's written books on the subject and teaches classes on it, but why don't you both address how you light these amazing subjects?
Well, we are carrying a fairly large, and speed lights is really, I mean, technology has made this project possible. I really hate saying that, but the technology, the fact that we can address a lot of these issues on social media, I can take people who are interested in the project along with me day to day and post photographs as we are traveling. But we're using speed lights. We're probably carrying 5, 6, 7 speed lights, and we will use almost all of them. I would say at least half of them in most of the photographs. We didn't do it in the operating room, but in the say the print, again, go back to the printing press. Those we're using speed lights, soft boxes, et cetera, multiple speed lights in the photographs. And as you said, I've written the book, so we are able to make a very, very compact lighting system, not only to be able to be compact in being able to maneuver around in the dance studios, et cetera, to keep out of people's way, but compact in the case of being able to carry it on the airplanes and being able to carry them around, because we have to haul everything on our backs.
And I carry battery pack systems, Profoto and Lumidyne. And in the field, I recharge them overnight with these gasoline generators. And I'm after layering my light to try to get it as a stage quality as much as I can. There's always an issue. I'm so much into the light that, like Lou, it's important that the light works, but you don't see it. And I'm into natural light as well. So I've been known to say that light is my mistress. She and I have a very special relationship.
We have a question from Antoine Fitzgerald. And Antoine, I'm not exactly clear about your question. So rather than just repeating it here, maybe if you could unmute yourself and ask the question. So just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you
Yeah.
fine.
I actually had a couple of questions. The first question is basically, Lou, you mentioned that you had pushback from the locals in terms of you getting these photographs. And I was wondering if the pushback you were getting was mostly from the fact that they knew you were from the United States, or based on spirituality purposes? Because I know that there are certain cultures who don't like to take their picture.
Pushback is largely bureaucratic. It's not pushback. It's not cultural pushback. Now, that and I mentioned along the way that you do have certain cultures that are not easily photographed by most people, and other cultures, and literally it can be one country right up against the next. I've had that happen where one country is relatively easy to photograph and the very other country very, very, very difficult. I mean, I'm talking about street photography. I'm talking about walking down the street and taking pictures, that kind of photography. But you do get it also from the CEOs of people, and that usually comes from the more bureaucratic, comes from the idea of what's in it for me. Why should I let you come in and interrupt my business? I'm not making any money. As a matter of fact, I'm losing money. And that's something that Chester, I'm sure, and a lot of the people out there know, that a lot of, even here in the United States, that kind of question, but that's part of the negotiation. And we can usually say, the wonderful thing is, most people online here do not get, is that in Africa, when I say Pan-Africa and explain what I'm doing, they almost to a person get it. So they understand that they're getting short shrift in Western media and that they're getting a bad image. And so the fact that I'm coming in to to try to, I'm not going to say change because I don't know that photographers change anything, but to try to readdress that issue makes the fact that they say, oh, you are working in our best interests. So it's not, and the last one, the cultural part is often gotten around once you employ the local magic. Sometimes it's just asking permission to take pictures, and all of a sudden all of the objections go away. Sometimes they put up a lot more resistance, but you find other people who say, okay, this is a good thing. And so, but I have not found any place that has any kind of cultural animosity to the photography. It's just that pay me or why?
That actually was my next question. Did you find that it was a benefit? Because I saw from one of the chats that Chester mentioned that he hired a local group. And did both of you find it as a benefit when you go and employ the local nationals there in those regions, as opposed to some other foreign investors who bring in their own country from that country of origin to actually do a lot of the work that's being done in those African countries? So it was a benefit to hire the locals from those regions. And Lou, I want to say that I really enjoyed your picture that you took, the one in Ghana. I actually was born in Haiti, and seeing all of those boats there kind of remind me like the street painters, you know, in certain parts of Haiti. There's a city called Jacmel in Haiti. It is really known.
Been there.
It's actually known as having a lot of painters and artists, you know, in that region. Since you've been there, so you know it well. So I really enjoyed that Ghana picture that you took with all those little boats there.
No, thank you. Well, I think that Chester must have some rep. How do you, when you do your street photography there, do you find resistance?
Well, let me answer that first by complimenting you earlier. I think Lou and I share a bridge here. We're both against what I call, and what we both recognize in white media, is a lack of, in our imagery about our people, the lack of three essential things: decency, dignity, and moral character when white photographers photograph our people. Working with local people is also very important because, especially for me, I go back and forth, and it allows me to transfer skills and train the local people to work with me. And then I must say that in addition to what Lou does, is that gaining people trust and talking to them and get their permission, I also factor in what I call a portrait budget and a location budget. Because I learned from living in Africa in the 70s in these villages that, you know, it's good that we come and we interface and we can make friends and people vibe us and what have you. But compared to the locals, we are very rich. The locals cannot afford an airplane ticket that'll take them back out of their country, even to pay the exorbitant visa fee to even go to their country. So I always make sure that I try to, when I go into a neighborhood and I'm photographing people, I ask them what I should pay them. And then I usually add more to that and I pay them. And then when I do locations, whether it's with church or government facilities, I make a donation to those facilities. Or when I go to schools, I make donations to those schools. I don't have to. I've already got the permission, but it's just my understanding the gap between them and us and how that money can be quite useful to them if whoever wants to share it with them. So I factor that in as part of my budget, a shooting budget.
Do I have time for another quick question?
Sure, if it's quick. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Chester, you had mentioned that you like to take portraits of you like to make what is unseen seen. How are you able to do that with photography? Because with Shakespeare, it's very easy. Not that it's easy. he does it through soliloquy, where you know what the character is thinking by soliloquy. How are you able to do that with photography? How are you able to portray a subject or the inner thinking, the inner mind, as you say, the unseen, seen, or what someone's thinking through photography?
Well, there's two incidents that happened in my life. One happened with my mentor, Arthur Rothstein, who was head of photography at Look magazine, who taught me that if you're going to photograph, do a portrait of somebody, well-known people is easier. Find out what they do. If it's a writer, read their books. If it's a musician, listen to their music. If it's an artist, see what they produce. If it's a politician, see what they're talking about, so that you can try to do and I guess my best example of interior portrait is Ottawa of Kosh. Ottawa of Kosh will make a portrait and you could get inside the head of that particular person, whether they were a political person or a musician, because he had used that formula. The second one is that when I was 9 years old, I had this near-death experience that gave me a window on what I came to understanding as parallel lives. And that there's a spirit. I really believe that the spirit is in charge of everything, and that there's a spiritual force behind what we see as obvious. So I look for my starting point is what is obvious, but I'm really looking to penetrate the thing that pulls the levers behind it, which is the spiritual force, so that I do a sandwich of both of those things. And if I succeed, it's because that's my formula.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you too, Mr. Thank you.
Great questions and great answers. Thank you, Antoine. We have time for one more question. There's one in the chat by Gina Washington. And Gina, would you just like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, I was concerned about equipment failures when you're out in the field and whatnot. What happens? What do you do when that goes horribly awry? And the second part of that was, with the low light features that are happening with camera equipment these days, are you doing more natural lighting with those features? Those were the questions. Thank you, guys. And this was a wonderful lecture. Thank you.
I've been doing advertising and corporate work, and I'm doing it all over the world, and people call me for, sort of to answer that question. And I call it redundancy. We are carrying, I measure the things I in tenths of an ounce. We are finding smaller and smaller lenses and cameras and tripods and a lighter and filters, et cetera, but redundancy. So we try to cover just about everything we have and that we essentially need with something that will cover if that one fails. So I'm carrying at least 4 cameras when I go out on four Nikon SLRs. And I'm carrying, like I said, we're probably carrying 4, 5, 6. I'm hoping to get 7 this time when we go to Uganda, depending upon whether we can pack it or not. Speed lights. And my tech assistant who's going with me has been working. He thinks I'm out of my mind and everything like that, but he is very, very good in researching and finding a stand that will fold in on itself, that will still be 8 feet tall, but so equipment we can't afford to have a failure when we're working. So we have the worst thing is this: the cords. We carry so many cords. We carry so many batteries. We carry so many chargers that they are the things that really add the weight. But this will kill you. This fails. You can't recharge your batteries. You can't get your computer to work. You can't, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to say, Apple does not help us. They are not making this easy for us. And so we have to be redundant to be able to make sure that we have devices that will keep the batteries running, to keep the cameras running, and multiple cameras, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So your point is well taken. There are places that you can go, and we have had to do this once or twice, buy something, but to substitute for a while, but usually that's expensive and time consuming.
That's it. Redundancy is it.
Redundancy.
Lisa, you want to close out with one final question or comment?
Well, I noticed that Chester, I mean, some of you've used lights and you use natural light, because a couple of your photographs, it looked like long exposures for the stars, and then you were lighting that. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that. And then also, Lou uses Nikon, but you use Leica, right?
Canon. I used to use Leica, but my eyes got bad, so I couldn't do it.
I am curious, like what lenses you find the most, but yeah, you could speak to whatever any of those subjects.
Well, I work anywhere from a 16 millimeter for doing those churches and to a 400 millimeter. So it just depends on what's going on. But to answer your question about lighting, see, the f-stop for the strobe is what it is, and that light disappears. If it's 1/500th of a second, it's gone. In order to bring in the stars, then on a tripod, if my exposure is 20 seconds, the shutter just stays open. So I've already got the building. Now the shutter stays open, and it brings in the low light of the stars. So this is one of the things of why I had to learn astrophotography, but also a knowledge of the flash, because the flash, it depends on whatever situation you're in. And if you're going to layer it, you've got that. It's going to be that quick, whatever that is. And then you can add other things onto it if that's what you want to do. Or you can, just let the shutter go 2/5 of a second, and you've got it. But you can play with it. I even say that, that with a tripod, I can even make light happen, because I can open it up and just let it, and I always try to shoot the largest depth of field when I'm shooting with the tripod, and I can go for a half minute, I can go for a minute, whatever it takes to make it work. But that way I'm adding light, but I'm doing it differently than adding artificial light. I'm bringing out the light from within.
Excellent, excellent. Real quick, each one of you, like, what photographers have inspired you when you first began, or even now? Which, just quickly, like each one of you, could you tell us? Lou, why don't you go first, and then Chester?
Well, I mean, again, I use all the good ones have influenced me, but I think I got, early on, I probably was looking, Gordon Parks, of course. I'm Roy DeCarava,
Yes.
He's been a huge influence, even though he was very, very mean to me when I talked to him.
You too?
Huh?
You
got you
too?
too? Yeah.
I thought it was just me.
No, he was very mean to me, but I still think he's wonderful. I got a lot of my from Sebastião Salgado. And then the old days, in the early days, especially the early days of commercial work, I got from Pete Turner, and probably the biggest influence in color was probably Ernst Haas. But other than Chester Higgins, I probably don't get much influence from anybody anymore.
That was thank you for that full answer. Chester, what about you?
Well, I will include that list that he has. And for my Africa work, though, I have to include, Ernest Cole for his work with people, and then I have to include a phenomenal eye, the eye of Leni Riefenstahl.
Well, who is that?
Leni Riefenstahl.
Oh,
Leni Riefenstahl had an ass-kicking eye.
didn't she?
I mean, she did it with her films, Olympics, 1936, and Triumph of Will, and she went back to do it with Anuba. But this woman had an eye that just kicks your ass. Cool.
Right.
So, and I really loved her work. And I loved, in the early days, there was a book by a photographer. It was a one-off, Mariella Ricciardi, I think, who did the book called Vanishing Africa. So those people I found to be very influential and inspirational. And I just riffed off, adding my own voice to it, just riffed off to make the kind of images that show some similarity. A color photographer at Look magazine, Joel Baldwin, was very, Pete Turner was great. Pete was more illustrative, and seems like he used a lot of filters. Joel was illustrative too, but he did it by making the film work for himself. So, all of these people become, a flag goes up and you pay attention, and you incorporate whatever part of their visual language into yours, and you keep going.
All right, well, thank you for that. Bring this to a close now. I really want to thank Lisa Dubois, Lou Jones, and Chester Higgins for a fantastic discussion and with the audience, and fantastic photographs. Keep an eye out for our YouTube channel for recordings of this, and we'll send out an email to everybody who's registered for this event with the YouTube link and the chat as well. Sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions, but thank you everybody for being here tonight, and stay cool this coming week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you, Chester and Lou. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins.
you.
Ciscography on the line.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Thank you.
I met you at the Hammond's house about 9 years ago. This is Sharon Dowdell.
Oh, great, Sharon. Great to meet you again. Oh, good.
Thank you. I'm fine, and I just love this. I'm going to be nuts for at least a week. Thank you so much, everyone. This was marvelous.